disturb.
Oh, that's what I should have done. Should have put it on Do Not Disturb, sorry. Okay.
Then it won't go through.
I don't know what I'm doing.
We should have thought of that, sorry. I just thought
That's
of it.
okay. You don't have to think of it. Okay, so Jeremiah 4:4. See what the prophet says here. Just one example. There's more than one. Okay? Circumcise yourselves to the Lord, and take away the foreskins of your hearts, you men of Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem, lest my fury come forth like fire and burn so that no one can quench it because of the evil of your doings.
That was Jeremiah what?
Jeremiah 4:4. Even then, they were resting in their circumcision. They were resting in their Jewish heritage. They were resting in possession of maybe some intent to keep the law. This is not new information that Paul is giving them. But Paul does go beyond the prophets. He agrees with the prophets, but he goes beyond them to say, but in the judgment, there will be no exemption, no distinction between Jew and Gentile. Whoever has sinned without law will perish without law. Whoever has sinned under the law will be judged by the law. Whoever sins will perish. Whoever sins will be judged. Doesn't matter your heritage, your circumcision, your possession of the law, if you do not keep it. This is the kind of person that God will award with a righteous standing before him. Somebody who continually persists in doing good. But nobody does. Except one man. Okay, now. What time is it, guys? I gotta keep going. Gotta keep going. I can't flip as fast as the Bible. All right, so we finished chapter 2. Yay! Okay, but there shouldn't be a chapter division here. This keeps going, okay? This keeps going. But, okay, listen. Lest his mainly Gentile audience would get haughty, okay? He's going to say this. You know what? There is an advantage to the Jew. Okay? There is an advantage to the Jew. Not in the judgment. There's no advantage to the Jew in the judgment. Okay? Anybody who sins will perish. What advantage then has the Jew? Or what is the profit of circumcision? Because, yeah, now the Jews are mad, right? They're what
You
on
threw us under the bus, Paul, right?
How is this consistent with God? How is this consistent with his workings? How is this consistent with the Old Testament? Okay. What advantage then has the Jew? Or what is the profit of circumcision? Much in every way. Chiefly because to them were committed the oracles of God. Okay, now he says first of all, and then he only lists one thing. Okay, he's going to list the rest of the things, Romans 9. He's going to pick back up with his list, and he's going to list all the rest of the things that are advantages to the Jews. But right now, he's just listing one thing, and then he knows the Jewish mindset, okay? Because he was a Pharisee of Pharisees. He knows their thinking, he knows their teaching, and he knows that immediately when he says all of these things, that they're going to be like, well, what on earth then? What advantage has the Jew? And then he knows that after he says, to them were committed the oracles of God, they're going to have another objection, okay? Another response. So he goes back and forth here between potential questions or questions that he has heard himself, questions of the Jewish mind, okay? And then he defends God. He defends God's justice. Okay, so he says that there's great profit. There is great profit to the Jews. There's great advantage to them, and there is profit in their circumcision. Okay, so he says much in every way, and he doesn't finish his list, but he will later in the book. Okay, but now he says, first of all, because to them were committed the oracles of God. They got God's words. They had the greatest revelation of God to men. Now, he uses the term the oracles of God instead of the law, probably because he wants to highlight that he's not just referring to the Mosaic law here. Now, you can use the word that way, the law, to refer to the Torah or the whole Old Testament, but he's been using it of the Mosaic law all the way through here. So he says the oracles of God, and the oracles of God is referring to in the New Testament and the Septuagint, the whole Old Testament, with maybe special emphasis on the promises of God. The promises of God. Of course, most of the promises, right, the promises of God are connected to a certain individual, the Messiah. The Messiah. And in Romans 9, he is going to say, at the end of his list of the advantages of the Jew, that according to the flesh, as their lineage, they have Christ, the Messiah. The Messiah. Okay, so this is a huge advantage. It's always a good thing to have more light from God. It's always a good thing to have more light from God. Greater light means greater opportunity. Okay? It also means greater accountability. Like Jesus said in Luke, to whom much is given, from them much will be required. So a greater opportunity, but also a greater accountability. But we shouldn't shy away from greater light and greater knowledge from God. Okay, we shouldn't walk away with that conclusion. Some people might be tempted to have that kind of conclusion. Well, I'd rather have less accountability, so I'm going to stop coming to Bible study. I'm going to stop going to church so that God can hold me accountable to more light. Oh, no.
Wrong.
Listen, you have this. You have it in your language. Isn't that accountability to you to avail yourself of it? Yeah, it is. It is. Can't escape accountability. But it is a blessing from God. It is a wonderful thing, he says. It's an advantage, much in every way, that they have the scriptures. The Jew was in the best position to walk with God. The Jew was in the best possible position to have fellowship with the living God. At the end of this section, Paul is going to say, therefore, by the deeds of the law will no flesh be justified in his sight. For by the law comes the knowledge of sin. All the time, Israel was breaking the law. They couldn't keep it. All the time, Israel was breaking the law. And they were to bring sacrifices. They were to bring sacrifices to atone, to cover, make a covering for their sins. They would have to kill the animal. The animal would have to die in place of the man. All the time, constantly reminded of their sin and the wages that sin brings, death. Should that not have brought Israel to the heart of David to say, my sin is ever before me? But blessed is the man to whom the Lord does not impute his sin, who cast himself in faith on God's provision. We're not there yet. Paul quotes that. Paul quotes that in chapter 4. Okay, but they were at the greatest light level. They had the greatest opportunity for relationship with God. But just like mankind, they suppress the truth in unrighteousness. For what if some were unfaithful? Will their faithlessness make the faithfulness of God without effect? Now, some translations translate this, what if some did not believe? And some translate it, what if some were not faithful? That's because it can mean either thing. It can be translated either way. Unfaithfulness, okay, can include both things. And when we get to Romans 9 through 11, we are going to see that the greatest charge levied against them is unbelief. But here, with Paul talking about works, and works being the emphasis, God's judgment of men according to their works, I think that probably the translation should be their unfaithfulness. Their unfaithfulness. But that would also include unbelief. So, what if, God gives them this light. God gives them this light, but then they're unfaithful. They're unfaithful. So how is it an advantage to them? Does that make the faithfulness of God without effect? If God gives them this and then they're unfaithful, okay, and then it does them no good, okay, does that make the faithfulness of God without effect? Paul says, certainly not. Okay, now this certainly not thing, Paul likes to say it. It's very emphatic. It's very emphatic. It's more like, heck no. Okay? That's what it's like. That's what it's like.
No way, Jose.
When you read that in your Bible, you need to think about that. It's very emphatic. Okay? Listen, the vast majority, okay, of Israel now has rejected the Messiah that Paul's proclaiming. The vast majority of them. So, the Jews might be sitting there thinking, well, how is God faithful then? How is God faithful? But Paul comes back with a no way Jose and says, indeed, let God be true, but every man a liar. As it is written, that you may be justified in your words and may overcome when you are judged. Here he's quoting David. Okay, and this is in Psalm 51 where David is confessing and acknowledging his sin with Bathsheba. And David, in his confession that his sin was against none other than God himself. His goal in saying this, that his sin is against God, is that God may be justified in his words and overcome when he is judged. The fact that David acknowledges before God, I have sinned against you. He is showing forth, okay, that God is just in his punishment of David. God is just in his sentence of David and his judgment against him. That's the context of this, which they would have known. Okay? So, this guy, David, okay, who they boast in too, they boast in him too, he was sinful. And he said, I've sinned against God. And my confession shows that God is perfectly just in judging me. God is just in judging me. His justice, his righteousness is shown in his judgment of me. Even if every single person turns their back on God, let God be true, but every man a liar. He remains righteous and true and just, of purer eyes than to look on evil. And his judgment of unbelieving Israel. His judgment against those who have broken the conditional covenant, okay, is just. God isn't just righteous. He's not just shown to be righteous when he keeps the promises of good things that will happen for obedience to the nation of Israel. Right? He's not just shown to be righteous when he keeps the blessings part of the covenant. He's shown to be righteous when he keeps his word about the curses that he has said will come for disobedience. He's shown to be righteous. Now, this is what the person says back. Well, if our unrighteousness demonstrates the righteousness of God, what shall we say? Isn't God unjust who inflicts wrath? Then he puts this thing in here, I speak as a man. Okay, because he wants to distance himself from this objection. The fly is going over the camera. He wants to distance himself from this question, okay, that he is putting in the mouth of a Jewish objector. Okay, the Jewish objector is like, well then, if, this is all just showing the righteousness of God, when we sin and we are unfaithful and we don't believe, and so he acts in accordance with his character, if it's showing his righteousness, isn't that kind of unfair? Isn't that unjust? If God's benefiting from this, if God's getting something good out of this, if he is being glorified and shown to be righteous by our sin, is he really just to inflict wrath on us because he's getting something out of this? Oh, again. Heck no. For then how would God judge the world? Listen, this is ridiculous, okay? If you think that because, you're a Jew and God has said these blessings and curses and you've been unfaithful and so God is, being true to his word and is showing his righteousness and he's getting glory for being shown to be righteous, if you think that that should exempt you from judgment, that God shouldn't be able to judge you because he's getting something positive, that he's being shown to be righteous, guess what? Then he can't judge anybody. Can't judge the Gentiles either. Okay? And no Jew thinks, oh, God doesn't have the right to judge the Gentiles. No Jew thinks that. Okay? The Jews know that God rightly judges the Gentiles. He says, hey, if you're going to say that because God is shown to be righteous, because he is benefiting from my unrighteousness, he shouldn't be able to judge me, well, guess what? Then he can't judge anybody in the whole entire world, and you know that's ridiculous. Now this is more of the same kind of reasoning, okay, being taken further. For if the truth of God has increased through my lie to his glory, why am I also still judged as a sinner? Same thing. Why should I be judged as a sinner when my sin glorifies God? Because he judges me in righteousness. And why not say, let us do evil, that good may come? As we are slanderously reported, and as some affirm that we say, their condemnation is just. Now, Paul's really good at using irony, Okay? He's really good at it. And here, he takes something that people have said he's saying. Okay? People have said, Paul, he's going around and he's saying, let's just do more evil so that good may come. What he says is one thing that he's not teaching that. Okay? But he turns around and he says, the thinking that you are bringing in your questioning of God leads to this thing you're accusing me of. Does that make sense? He's saying, if you want to question God, okay, and say, well, if our unfaithfulness points out his righteousness and makes him glorified for his just judgment, how can he judge us? Well then, let's just do evil so that good may come. God will be glorified for judging us justly, so why don't we just do evil? It's not fair of God. Paul says, that's what your questioning leads to, is this thing that you're accusing me of saying. And then he says, their condemnation is just. Right? Now, he's been saying the whole time, everybody's without excuse. Everyone without excuse. Everyone is justly under the condemnation of God. Okay? And now he says, these people, their condemnation is just too, by the way. What then? Are we better than they? Us Jews, Paul says. Not us Jews. We're not Jews. Okay. But Paul says, with him and the Jews, he says, are we better than they? The Gentiles. Not at all. For we have previously charged both Jews and Greeks that they are all under sin. As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. Everybody has stood in the courtroom here. They've all been found without excuse and guilty. Everybody. Jews and Greeks are all under sin. Now, when he says under sin, he's not just saying that they have sinned. Okay, he's not just saying they're guilty because they have sinned. He's going to say later they all have all sinned. Okay, but this is more forceful, more comprehensive. Jews and Gentiles are all under sin. They are all under the dominion of sin. They have all been subjected to the wrath of God in handing humanity over to the control of their own sin. They are all under slavery and bondage to sin. They are all under the guilt and the condemnation of sin. They are all under the judgment of God that rightly falls against those who practice such things. They are all under sin. Its penalty, its power, its presence. All men. Now, you might listen to all this about the Jews and nod your head and think how silly, How silly of them to think their circumcision would exempt them from judgment. How silly of them to think that they have a defense before God just because of their Jewish birth and heritage. How ridiculous of them to think that God would accept them despite their sin because of intent to keep the law. But I have talked to many people who have grown up in church who are leaning on something they have done, believing it makes them right with God or exempt from His judgment. I hear the phrase that breaks my heart of teenagers, telling their conversion story after they went to camp. I gave my life to Jesus. I committed to follow God. I prayed a certain prayer. I asked for forgiveness. Can you imagine going before a human judge, okay, not even the holy judge of all the earth who has purer eyes than to behold evil, okay, but that you would be convicted of a crime, okay, let's say you sped too many times, okay, yeah, that's wrong, speeding's wrong, okay, it's breaking the law, right? So, you don't think it's a big deal, but guess what? It's wrong. And the law can convict you of it, right? So, you have sped too many times and you've been caught and you're guilty. You were. The speedometer says, okay, that you were speeding. It doesn't matter if you intended to obey. Okay, but you have been caught speeding 10 times. 10 times. Okay? And can you imagine going before that unholy judge, okay, and saying, well, when the police officer pulled me over, I asked for forgiveness. I asked for forgiveness. So certainly I am exempt from any punishment because I asked for forgiveness. Is a just judge able to take that excuse and say, okay, you're acquitted of all the charges against you? No. No. Can you imagine if you go before that unholy judge and you say, you know what, I told the police officer, I told him, I promise I will try my best. I will try my very best. Like, I commit my life to obeying this law. I commit my life to following God and keeping this law. Okay? So, certainly, I should be off the hook. Like, I should not have to pay for this crime because I committed my life. I've turned from my wicked ways, and I will try my very best to be good. No, that doesn't hold up in court. No, it does not. Okay? No. Not good enough. Okay? But I'm going to start going to church every week. You know what? I'm going to even go to church on Wednesdays, okay? Wednesdays and Sunday. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be at church, okay?
Sunday night.
Sunday, yep. 6 o'clock prayer. I promise. Oh, really? So you should get off? You shouldn't have to pay for that? Is that what a just judge is going to do? That's okay. You know, just sweep that under the rug. Well, I intended. I tried my best. I intended. Doesn't matter what you intended. Doesn't matter if you tried to keep the 10 Commandments. It doesn't matter. In the court, it doesn't matter. I prayed. I gave money to poor people. You still spend, okay?
So tell us what you want to hear them say.
None of these things exempt you from the consequences of your sin. If you stand before the holy, just judge of all the earth, in whom is no darkness or shadow of turning, who has purer eyes than to behold evil, with whom evil shall not dwell. Will you have an excuse? Will you have a defense? Will you defend yourself? If you stand before the judge and he lays out the indictment before you, you have sinned against him. You have not given him all the glory, all the attention, all the thanks he deserves. You have been instead selfish, self-seeking. You have walked in pride, envy, complaining, anger, and the list goes on and on. In the face of every sin of your life laid before you, do you think that you would say, I gave my life to Jesus. I asked for forgiveness. I went to church. I prayed a prayer. I did this and I did that. Without excuse. A just judge dispenses punishment according to what the man has done. The perfectly just judge will not show partiality to those who have tried and failed to be righteous.